Hey everyone, I'm Kate Kennedy and I'm here with day 71 of 100 Days of Keene, PA. And today we're going to talk with Royce Novosel Johnson. Royce grew up here and moved back in 2012 and has had a part in the revitalization of Uptown Keene. And so today he's going to share some stories about growing up, about what brought him back, and about what he hopes for his children in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and flip you around. We're going to walk on in and say hello. Hi, Royce.
Hello.
How are ya?
I'm great, Kate. How are you?
Good. Hey, thank you so much for letting us sit down with you today and hear some of the stories about, what brought you back. But before we start there, let's go ahead and talk about where you were born.
Okay. Well, first, Kate, I'd like to thank you for doing this. The 100 Days of Keene is awesome. I think it's cool to share these stories with each other, and I think you've been doing a great job in the short time you've been in this role. So thank you for everything you're doing. As far as my growing up and being from Keene, I was born in 1982 in Keene. I was Dr. Sicker baby.
Yay!
Which is great.
One of the 2,400.
Yeah, my brother and sister were two of the other ones.
Yeah.
But I grew up in Keene, had a great childhood, lived on West Pine Avenue growing up, and at that point it was a great block and area to live in. A lot of kids lived there, so we were able to have, what you'd expect for a great childhood. Wiffle ball games, spotlight, everything like that.
Could walk to school.
Walked to school all the way through 8th grade, which was fantastic. And then had older siblings that could take me to high school from that point until I was old enough to drive.
Perk of being the youngest.
Yeah, exactly.
And what year did you graduate?
I graduated Keene in 2001. Like I said, I had a great time here. Felt it was a good opportunity for me to, and where I was in my life, I was ready to move on to something different. So I got an opportunity to go and get an education and continue playing sports, notably football up at Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire. So I was able to get an Ivy League degree, coming from Keene, and there haven't been a lot of kids to be able to do that. So I absolutely jumped on the opportunity and made the most of my time up there. Learned a lot of there, I guess, about growing in general, and obviously the education was part of it. But after that point, I still really felt that I wanted to go and explore more and do more things. And although I loved Keene and always have loved Keene and have nothing but great memories, even when, good times and bad, I still love this town and the people from it. I was able to transition and live in Boston for a few years, and then ultimately moved to Washington, D.C. for a handful of years too, and did mostly corporate type jobs in sales, but for medical companies and telecommunications companies and things like that. And it was great. I liked it, but at the same time, I always, felt that there was something missing, and I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know, how can you be successful at these jobs and still feel, a little bit empty. There's something that just isn't there. And it wasn't until I moved back that I kind of found what that was. And that's, involvement in the community and being part of something much larger than yourself.
Yeah, being connected to something bigger, like you're saying.
Yep.
So tell us about that. When did you move back and what brought you back here?
Yeah, things were going well for me in DC. I had a good job. I was in a management position, several people working under me. And it happened one day, I'd come up with my wife, Katie. She's not from Keene, she's from the DC area. And we were living up there. We'd come to Keene a handful of times a year. And one time we were home, and my parents took us out into the woods on one of the properties we have, and they were showing us a timber sale that we had recently had, and kind of noticed that my father was having some trouble getting around in the woods as well as he used to be able to do. And a little before that point, my parents had identified that it was the right time in their lives to focus more on themselves and their health than to try to manage all of these timber holdings we have. So they transitioned land down to my brother and sister and I, and basically said, you guys go ahead and you have a try at it. And that was great. It was a great thing to happen for our family in general. But driving back to Washington, D.C. that Sunday, I looked at my wife and I said, I think that I might need to start coming back to Keene. For me, it was important to have a point in my life where I could come back and learn what we have as a family, the history of these properties, where they are, the ins and outs of the timber industry, the oil and gas involved in it, and be able to know what we have so that we could pass this down to the next generation. We didn't have kids at that point, but it was always in the plan my siblings and I are fourth generation in the timber management role, or timber ownership, I guess. And, we didn't have any boots on the ground here to really do it, and it was getting to be a little overwhelming for my parents. So I had to write a business proposal to my in-laws to prove that I wasn't crazy to do this.
I love that.
And I gave up a good job down there, and it was a little, shocking to the company and to, the family members and everything, but I felt it was absolutely worth it to sacrifice some time in my life to learn about why we have what we have, where we go from here, and be able to pass this down to the next generations without somebody who might have an ulterior motive or be advising, maybe which sounds good on paper, but actually isn't the best for our family in the long term.
So you kind of referenced your family history in the timber business. Could you share some stories or some history with us about
Sure.
that?
Well, two sides of my family are well known. I have two last names, Novosel Johnson. The Johnson side were the educators. Phyllis Johnson was a Spanish teacher for a long time. Vern Johnson mentioned a bunch of times as a principal and superintendent, teacher, coach. The Novosel side was more into the logging and timber game. So, it all started with my great-grandparents when they were here, came here, and moved from what is now Croatia, and got here and bought their first piece of property. And from there, they had several children. A lot of these were boys that got into the timber business. They grew up in logging camps, and like so many families from here did, which this area has deep roots in logging. Thus, the name of our brewery, Log Yard Brewing, being around that theme as well. But a big event that happened in our family was my great-grandfather was willing and wanted to sell their piece of property and get rid of it and make money and not have to work as hard. But his wife was the holdout, Barbara Novosel, Barbara Balaban. And she said, if anybody's going to buy it, it's going to be our kids, or it's going to be our boys. So she wouldn't sign the contract. And eventually, my grandfather and his brothers were able to buy that property. And then from there, they were able to buy more properties. And they worked hard. They used the crosscut saws. They did the logging themselves. They did the trucking. They did the skidding. They had a sawmill. They did everything they can, and they used those profits to reinvest in more properties that they needed, both from a stock standpoint to keep feeding their mill, but also that's, with a little property they made, they'd buy some other pieces for in the future because they were looking, in advance of what they might potentially need. So fast forward, my parents have it for a while. They do a great job of maintaining it and growing it a little bit. Now my brother and sister and I are now in the driver's seat of what's going on in our timber properties. And we see the advantages of having sustainable forestry and making sure that we do what's right by the forests. Common misperception is that logging is horrible and you just clear cut and do all these things where, sometimes that happens. It doesn't happen on our properties, but for us, we do what's right by the forest to make sure that the next generations, they have trees to go back to. They have nice wooded areas to walk through. New generations of trees are coming up. Animals and wildlife are be able to be out there and have food sources. So I'm very lucky to have, ancestors and that put all the time and sweat and hard work into having where we are now. And by no means does that mean that we can just not continue to do this and have our legacy move on. So I spend a lot of time understanding what we have, where it is, who the neighbors are, what the history is. And finally, what I thought in my business plan would take me 2 years to do, it took me about 5.5 years. So
it's a lot to learn.
It was a lot to learn.
You don't have a background really in logging or timber at all.
No, we spent a lot of our time in the summers splitting firewood or at sports camps or playing with our friends. We didn't spend much time in the woods on our properties. And then I went to college and I was a government major, so I didn't do any forestry, but I had to learn quickly with a pretty steep learning curve, but I had some help from my father, who was able to, Barry Johnson, who was able to give me a lot of information. My mom, Carly Novosel, knows a lot about the business, and then some local foresters. There's a couple in Keene that I've used. Our main one is out of Marshburg, Tom Fryer. He worked with my grandfather, he worked with my father, and now he's worked with me. So he probably knows more about our properties than than I do, but he's been a huge help in getting us to this point.
Yeah, it's so great that you're learning it by experiencing it, going out, and sometimes that's the best way to learn. And I can't help but think about what your great-grandmother would probably be thinking right now. You know, she's the one that allowed it.
She would probably say I was right. I told you so. So that's probably an argument my great-grandfather wouldn't like to bring back up, because he knows that he might not have been making the right decision back then.
I love it. And so your family business is what brought you back, but you didn't just narrow your time in Keene to that. You've been really involved in the community and the revitalization that's been going on recently. Could you share some of the ways and some of the projects that have been happening that you've helped with?
Sure. Well, when we made the decision ultimately to move back to Keene, my wife, who's from the DC area, said if we're going to move to Keene, we need to get involved. And that's the part that I learned later on that I felt I'd been missing. And so we got involved, and immediately, or relatively quickly after moving here, we got involved with CARE, the Keene Area Revitalization Enterprise. And a lot of great things that they've done since they were, originally founded decades ago. But it was the right opportunity for us, and it absolutely was the right fit for us to contribute and give back and volunteer. So some of the projects, the first major one that we got in on was the amphitheater that had been years in the making. It was a vision. It location-wise, it's where the wall was, uptown on Fraley Street. That, was a little bit of an eyesore. It had graffiti until Denny Driscoll had painted a mural on there, and then it became a little bit of public art. But still, it was crumbling, and there was vegetation behind it. But what helped us work was that we formed a subcommittee where we could focus, fewer cooks in the kitchen, let's say. Mike, Mary, and I co-chaired that, and we were able to take that from a dilapidated lot that was not attractive, and we were able to turn it into a beautiful amphitheater that is used for a lot of community events. Everything from children's plays to music concerts to weddings to hot dog eating competitions, all kinds of great uses at that amphitheater. And we were able to raise the funds and the money needed to do that by sitting and talking to people and writing grants. And we've gotten contributions from private donors and individuals to local businesses to businesses that aren't based in Keene but maybe have a little bit of a footprint here, that understand what we're trying to do, and they supported this cause. And since that point, they've supported more because we showed that we could take this on and get it done. So that was the big one with the amphitheater, and we've worked on a few more since then.
What's the formal name of the amphitheater?
The formal name is the OG Crawford Park.
What's the story behind that?
Erie Insurance was a very big help in getting this amphitheater done. They were really the one that took us over the top and allowed this to happen. We would have gotten there eventually, but they helped us get there a lot faster. They gave us a sizable donation towards this amphitheater, and we had set parameters for if you give X amount, you have different rights naming rights within this project. And the one that they fulfilled was the one that gave them the opportunity to name the park. And the significance of Erie Insurance doing that and naming it OG Crawford is that OG Crawford was one of the two original founders of Erie Insurance, and he's from Keene. Which a lot of people don't know, and they still don't know. We have a plaque right there in front of it, Kate.
I know,
that people
I
could
never
read.
read the plaque.
But it's a cool story. I mean, a lot of people, didn't know and still don't know who O.G. Crawford was, but he was a very influential person, in the insurance world. He helped found what's now Erie Insurance. So the chairman of Erie Insurance had known of O.G. Crawford. He appreciates and respects the history and lineage of their company. And so he was always looking for an opportunity to give something to Keene in memory of the co-founder of their business. And Mike Mary was instrumental in getting this lined up, as he has a Erie Insurance agency. He was able to, work those channels, and we were able to sit and talk to these guys and explain what we were trying to do. And they stepped up to the table and they helped us out in a big way, and they were happy to do it. So it was one of those opportunities where things come together nicely, and we were able to incorporate a little history and give a little tip of the cap there to O.G. Crawford.
I think that's great because then somebody who could have so easily gotten lost in history that now has a place that is memorializing
Yeah.
your contribution. So that's
Absolutely.
awesome. What are a few, just to give people a little bit of a glimpse into the future, what are the few of the projects that CARE is currently working on?
Yeah, so I mean, we do small ones where we can with banners through town to beautify the Main Street. We have some, hanging planters and baskets for flowers coming up probably, hopefully next year, which will really make the Main Street even more enhanced, and bike racks that we have coming in to town. But we also purchased the Clay Street School that, we haven't had it for 2 years, and we know this is a multi-year project. It's gonna take a while to get there. It's a big building, it needs a lot of work. But we've been slowly restoring that and want to turn that into, a nice building in part of town, especially on that side of town. So that was a big one for us. And then we're working on a larger overall betterment project for what we call the Eastern Gateway. And that's coming in from Route 6, down Biddle Street and entering town in that way. So we have a whole section of town that we're working on that we're starting to get some publicity out there in the papers and local media, I guess, in general, and Facebook, where what we're trying to do is enhance that part of town. Everything from tearing down dilapidated buildings, abandoned buildings, to helping people that live in their homes, fix up their homes if they need, if they need new paint, if they need some sidewalks, to help restore buildings and homes that are just need a little TLC, and then also building new homes. And these range from single family homes to potential assisted living type of homes, single story, easier for our senior citizens to live in when they want to maybe transition to something and they can't keep up with their larger houses anymore, to apartments for young professionals coming back that might not be in the position to want to buy a house or take on that burden and want a place that's newer that they don't have to put a lot of work into to start. So it's just a big project in general that would bring millions of dollars into town and help an area out. And if that works well, then hopefully you parlay that into the next portion of town and just keep working and going through and utilizing the channels and resources that are available to towns like ours, and really make a difference to make this town even better than it is.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's cool about that is that CARE has a steering committee where neighbors, people that live in that neighborhood, are part of it and trying to work. Everyone's working together. It's not just coming in, but it's the whole neighborhood working together for this.
Yeah, well, this is any project we do, we try to be as inclusive as possible, where if you want to help out, Care for Keene Day is a great example, where you get hundreds of people that all want to help and they're willing to do it. They just want to know how. And if we can give them the guidance and show them how to do it, it works well. And this would be another project like that. We have community or neighborhood advocates from these different blocks in that side of town where help us out. We're going to need things where we're going to, there's a call to arms to come and volunteer some time. We need a little sweat equity, or we need their help or advice on something. And the more people we can get involved in it, the more ownership that we'll have as a town, and the greater our sense of community will be.
I love it. So 2012, you start coming back, you help with your family business, you and your wife move here, start a family, you get involved in CARE and other things, and you start a business.
Yeah.
Could you tell us the story of how your business started?
Yeah, it's a great example of what's going on in Keene right now, and how things are building up, and the trickle effect and everything like that. When I was working in DC, one of my friends, who's now my business partner, Mike Dunn, we'd communicate, even though I wasn't living down there and he was still in the DC area. And ultimately, him and his wife came to visit Keene a couple times. And on one of these trips, we were trying to decide, what do we want to do? What do we want to do for this weekend? And we said, well, let's brew some beer. We'll brew in my kitchen. And he'd been brewing for a while. And so it was during this brew process, he was talking about his desire to start a brewery. And he was looking to do it in Northern Virginia, where he lived. And there were difficulties in that. Leases were expensive, land was expensive, buildings, employment, employees, everything was expensive. And so he really was, and it was just him. So he was challenged to get it off the ground. We talked about Keene, though. Look at what's going on in Keene. You got this amphitheater, some businesses are springing up. The town's coming together. There's a great sense of community and pride going on right now, and you could feel it. So we said, why not do this in Keene, right? A town like Keene can benefit from a brewery and a new business a lot more than Northern Virginia can. Northern Virginia's doing great. Keene, it needs more shots in the arm whenever it can get it. So this was a great opportunity for us to do it in this town, to help this town out, have a sense of community, give back to our community, which we try to do whenever possible. And so fast forward, now we got this brewery going and it's going well, and we're looking and we're doing an expansion and upgrading and getting our beer to more places. Everything's working well in that regard. And then we get my partner Mike, who's now moving up to Keene with his wife. And Adam Rising is our head brewer, and he's in charge of our brewing. He lived in Keene but worked in Bradford for years. Now he's got a job in Keene and he's closer to home. So we're able to bring talent and individuals that maybe aren't even from this area to town, and then from there sparks other businesses and people that are looking to do this in town, not from a brewery standpoint, but start a business. They see we can do this. You can have opportunities to start new businesses and come back. So we've had a lot of fun at Log Yard, and it's been so fun to see people like yourself, Kate, that come back because there's now an opportunity. There's something cool happening. It's not just, I came back to Keene and I don't know what I'm going to do. You can, if you're on the fence and you see an opportunity, or you're trying to think what can I do, where do I want to do it, Keene's an absolutely fantastic place to do it. It's thriving. There's a ton of momentum. There are more opportunities. There are a lot of jobs out there that people are looking to fill, which means that there's going to be more people that we need to bring from the outside. And we're, talented people that are looking to, have a great opportunity in their lives. And then the cool thing is they'll probably get caught up in the whole community thing that's going on. And then, that's even more help we have with the efforts that we're doing here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have 3 boys.
Yep.
What does it mean to you to be raising your kids here?
So I got 3 little boys. Right now they're 4 years old. That's Everett. 2 years old. That's Calhoun. And 5 to 6 months old. That's Montgomery, Monty. It means a lot for me to be able to raise them here. There are so many niceties of raising children in a smaller town versus to use maybe a term my grandma used, the hustle and bustle of the city, right? Things are easier to do. You need to take a kid to daycare. It's a lot easier to do that. It's more affordable to do that. There's less things that you have to worry about. But also it's important for me to raise my kids here because I see and I benefit from the hard work and the lineage that my family has established in this community. Moving back to Keene, one of the things that really helped me was all the hard work and done by my father, my mother, and my grandparents, and even my great-grandparents. And he tried to treat people with respect and give back to the community and be involved and help people when they're down and do everything they can. So that when I moved back to the area, a lot of doors were open for me and people would give me the time of day to sit and say, instead of, they could be very dismissive and say, hey, this kid wants to talk about an amphitheater project and ask for money. I don't know him. It wasn't like that. It was, oh, I know your parents, I know your grandparents. Yes, I'll sit down and talk to you. And it really helped me get established quickly in this town and feel welcome. And I want my boys to be able to feel that same thing should they desire to either live in town in Keene after they graduate high school or college or whatever they plan to do, or if they want to live elsewhere and travel and work other jobs and know that they have an opportunity to come back to Keene and they'll be welcome because you have a couple families that have been trying to do things the right way and be involved in the community and help set the table for the next generation. So it's important for me that they have their roots here and continue to work hard towards giving back to a community like this.
And learning your family business.
That's
really
also
important.
a very important thing. Yeah.
Well, this is something we haven't talked about, but I just thought of, and I don't know if you even remember this conversation, but you told me a story that I think your grandfather told you about locking your car. He warned your wife about locking her car in the summer. Could you share that story?
Yeah. Before we moved back up here, Katie, my wife, she had heard a lot of stories. You don't want to move to small towns. Small towns are horrible. The city's where you got to be. Blah, blah, blah. But my Grandpa Vern, my Grandpa Johnson, he had told her when we were starting to transition back or when we were thinking about it, he said, no, you got to be careful. When you're back here in Keene, you make sure you lock your door when you leave your car. And she kind of looked at him thinking, I didn't realize it was that type of a town. He said, you got to be careful because if you don't lock it, you might come back and there might be a bag of zucchinis in there or maybe some potatoes because that's, that kind of talks about this nature of Keene where you do show up back at your house after being gone and there's a a bag of tomatoes there, and somebody says, hey, just pick these from my garden, thought you might want some. And especially with the zucchini, towards the end of the summer when there's so much of it and people obviously can't eat all of it, so they give it all away.
I love that story.
But that's a warning for people, is watch out, make sure you lock your doors.
That's awesome, Royce. Well, thank you. This has been so great. Is there anything else that you'd want to share before we wrap up?
I would just say, to anybody that's, that's on the cusp of trying to figure out what they're doing, or contemplating moving back to town, or even visiting it to see what's going on. I think that it's important for everybody to know that they're welcome, and the stigma of not having done something right, and that's why you're back in town is it's dissipated. It's not there now. You come back to town and you try something, you get involved. That's has a good light to it. People are excited about that, and people are very positive when people are making decisions like that. So, if you want to talk to anybody in this town that's going through it right now, that's, entrenched in the revitalization of this, there's a whole bunch of people to talk to in Keene about that, to hopefully persuade you to maybe take a chance and come back and be part of this.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Anything else?
Thank you, Kate.
You did great, Royce. Thank you so much for your.
And thank you guys for watching. Every time I talk to Royce, I leave feeling like jazzed up, and I just want to, conquer the town and for good. So if you want to be part of that, like he said, if you want to come and visit, or if you want to think about moving back, do it. Talk to us. We'd love to talk to you. And I would also love to hear your stories. What is it that has brought you back home? What has kept you here over the years? Or what makes you want to visit Keene? Please share those stories or those ideas in the comments below. Thank you again for tuning in today, and we'll see you again tomorrow for day 72.